I'm Ross Humphreys, and this is the San Rafael Ranch. My wife and I bought this ranch in 2000. It's a 200-year-old Spanish and Mexican land grant. It's been in agriculture longer than that. We bought it for the land value, but knowing that we were going to put cattle on here, I visited with the family that owned it before us, who owned this ranch 100 years, and they had been running Herefords for the first 80, 90 years, and then began to introduce Angus bulls and develop commercial black baldy program and sell them that way. So I decided that we would start with the baldies and work with them, and I could still go to Bob Sharp and get some guidance from him from time to time. And his cowboy was a cowboy that I inherited with the ranch, so I learned how to work here by first learning Spanish, to work with this guy and understanding the ranch. And I bought the Ranching 101 notebooks from the University of Arizona Ag Department and read them all the time. And we had our first calf crop to sell in 2001, and unlike the neighbors who mostly go to the sale barn, I had met a group of cowboys near Douglas, Arizona, in the Malpai Borderlands group, and they were using the video auction a lot. And it seemed to make sense to me to sell trailer loads of cattle rather than driving them 6 and 10 or 12 at a time to the auction. And the guys in Douglas were making better money than they were doing it here. Now, we started off with 200 cows on a ranch that's had easy 1,500 that I can document, and what I read in the historic papers, 15,000 cattle here, but maybe it was on some of their Mexican ranches as well, but a lot more cows than we had. So my notion was, why not hold those calves over and sell yearlings? In fact, why not birth them on the green and keep them and grow them another season across the green and sell yearlings? And we did that for several years. And I met a bull seller, an Angus bull seller, also a friend of a friend who raised Angus cattle since he was 12 years old, and he'd take all day with me and talk about these little bulls and choose some and focus on dollar energy was a big factor for him. He's in a lot rougher country than we're in. And so we did that, and about year 2 with that, one of the calves that we had was the son of a Gardner EXT. And Billy Dunn bragged on that bull and said he was hard to find. Most of the Gardner bulls have lower values than $E, and for him it was really important to have this. 1 or 2 years later, his bulls became more popular, and he actually started having sales. And so I went to a sale where 35 bulls were for sale, and there were 3 old ladies in the crowd and 2 cattlemen who wanted to buy bulls, and the prices got bid twice to what I had paid for them in private treaties. Meanwhile, another friend, a Malpai rancher, said that after visiting here that he knew of a family in Valentine, Texas that had done really well with Angus. Oh, the Means family. So I actually looked them up in the phone book and called them and visited a little bit, and they said, yeah, they worked in rough country and this and that. And so then I started calling Mark Gardner. Actually, I started at the bottom of the list, and one brother passed me to the next one. Eventually I got to Mark Gardner. But he spent hours and hours with me talking about these bulls. And yeah, he said, you know your country, we know our bulls. You know, if you want this kind, you should be looking at the $E values, but you're the one that has to decide. And I didn't want to go to one of these sales. It's 900 miles from here to get to Ashland, Kansas. And so Mark suggested that his ranch veterinarian, Randall Spare, bid for us. And so I called Randall, and he said he would do it. And I sent him a small list of bulls that I'd picked off of the catalog. This was from the first of the fall sales that Gardner's offered. And Randall bought some for us, and we went from there. Well, we sold our cattle on the video for several years in a row, and it was glorious the first year. I got cattle loads sold. The way that works for me is that you set a size and a weight, and you deliver them on that, and at shipping time is really the only time I learned how heavy they were. And each year they weighed less than my promise. So I ended up kind of leaving money on the table. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that in my 15 years here, it's rained later and later in the year. And if I'm shipping a yearling, then I don't have the grass in November or December because the season changes quickly. So I thought I probably ought to go to the program where I wean my calves and get them off the ranch. And I wanted to maintain ownership of them as far as I could to see what they were. And so I started feeding in different feed yards with help from ranchers I knew and one thing and another. The gardeners introduced me to several different feedlot operators, and actually they write about them all the time. And I visited with most of them on the phone, who were the announced ones, and decided that I was going to own the cattle to harvest. And only recently, I think, for the past 3 years, we've delivered our cattle through U.S. Premium, and have bought associate shares in that, and have delivered them to that program. And for the first time ever, I'm seeing all the data that goes behind those cattle. What I didn't see in other commercial lots were the harvest data. We probably had 5 years worth of customers. I had good customers on the video, and they would take our cattle and put them in all natural programs, and I never got the data back except once at the end. And they had done really well on quality, but they had a lot of cost in them because they were being fed in that natural program. My friend Billy Dunn was really focused on $E, so in my conversations with Mark, I always was trying to ask him if he thought that was true, and he wouldn't give me any guidance on my country. He said, "You know your country, I know these cattle, you'll have to kind of sort that out on your own." But kind of sideways and by accident, I was learning this ranch a little better and wanted to go from 200 cows to maybe 400 cows without having to do all replacement heifers. I wanted to take my cattle and market them all the way through, so largely we selected replacement heifers on phenotype, which were the good-looking ones. We bred those, but I bought some other cattle, and I started going to the Profit Proven sale, actually through Mark Gardner. He bid on the cattle for me the first year, and he said, "Well, would you like a trailer load?" And I said, "Sure." So well, that's about 40 in my mind. How about if we just bid on a few from a number of different houses? And so I got 40 cows here that looked like meat on feet to me compared to our cattle. I mean, they were boxier and framier. They had a different look to the type of cattle than we had, because by that time we were almost all Rito 6i6 offspring here, and they have a different shape than these cattle. And I had no idea what their dollar energy values were, but they didn't do badly. And then I bought cattle from other people in that area, other Gardner customers, and all those cows, even the ones that arrived here, big and framey, never fell off in the winter. So I backed off on my insistence that the cattle have all high $E, and then start looking at what my kill sheet looked like. And so our emphasis has always been on calving ease, because we don't want to have to watch them. So I kind of set a benchmark of 8 as where we want to be, at 8 or better, and with a little bit of guidance we bought predestined sons whose numbers have dropped down to 5 sometimes, and no problems with calving on those calves in particular. But we'd like to have on the maternal and the paternal side is good calving ease values. And with the U.S. Premium data, I'm spending more time looking at things like marbling and ribeye. So every year we try to buy a few bulls in the fall and a few in the spring, and we have 2 calving seasons here. So the bulls go out, and the one that's adjacent to that sale period, and I try to buy a better bull on every sale for cheaper. Now, buying them for cheaper is hard, but. Well, you know, as a rookie, the dollar beef factor was easy and complicated, because every text you read says, if you look at one, that's the one to look at, because it's kind of a composite. But there are dozens and dozens of factors, and I wanted to focus on having a calf every year on the ground that was born, and then go forward and try to improve the bunch from that. So the issues that people talk about with phenotype with Angus cattle, I've never seen an issue with the bad udder on an Angus cow, whereas if they're Hereford Angus Baldies, you know, you need to look at them every year because they're going to start having problems. But since we've been only buying Angus bulls to cover these cows, which are more and more Angus as the generations pass, we have no problems with milk as a factor. My cowboy, this is a two-person operation, really just a one-person operation. And when we started seeing things like docility factors as something that we could measure, which happened, I think, in my time in this business, we started buying Sons of 50/50. And our herd, you can, as you did this morning, you can walk out in them and basically pet them and all that, and they're easy all the time. We don't have any issues. Well, I didn't know that the guy would ever need a guarantee, but I can't remember if it was the second or third time I bought a bull. We had one who became unserviceable, and I called Mark, and he said, well, take him to the sale and just tell us what you got for him, and you can have a credit or the money. And in 10 years, we've probably done that 3 or 4 times. And much to my embarrassment, done that, but they stand by it. And I know other customers who've had bulls disappear, and the gardener stood with them, and it helps. It really helps.
And it's always fun and helpful for me to get on the operation. And you know, I never try to insinuate that I know the country or the land or anything else. You know, as a boy that grew up on the Great Plains of Kansas, you know, you think of Arizona being quite a bit different than Ashland, Kansas. I think what was interesting to me was seeing so many similarities in the grass.
Yep.
And my question would be, and I think you've already answered it to some extent, but you know, we often heard as a kid growing up that these Angus cattle can't work in these environments. Could you tell a little bit, you made some mention today of some things you've done and how you've improved your reproductive rates and just how the Angus cattle have worked for you?
Well, in your audience, this is going to sound a little silly, but I mean, we didn't have a mineral program, and the first year we had cows on the ranch, we didn't supplement them. And we ended up in the springtime with skinny, bony cows, and the breed up wasn't all that spectacular. But I was actually at one of your sales about 4 years ago, sitting next to a man from northern Kansas, and we were talking about how things were going, and I said, well, we feed about 1 pound a day of 28% protein in the winter, and I think I'm spending, I don't know, $60, $80 a cow or something like that. He said, wow, that's a really good deal. And then I realized that he was spending other kinds of money, but he was also having better results at harvest time than we were having. And I made some comment about conception rates, because one of the things I've done that my neighbors don't frequently do is I preg check every year, and we were getting about 85% preg check rate. And he said, well, you got a good mineral program, don't you? And I said, well, no. You know, we use mineral in the winter supplement, and I visited with several people, and it wasn't the first guy who told me about it that made my light bulb come on, but about the third time I heard about a mineral program, I thought we should try a mineral program. And the following year, and every year since, we've been 93 to 96% pregnant every year on these cows. And like a bad time for us would be the first calf heifer. And we looked at first calf heifers today, and that bunch is 90% bred. So I learned those things on the side, but you asked the question about country. Before I wanted to bring a Kansas cow to Arizona, I wanted to know that it could eat cactus. And I asked the Meanses about that on the phone, and their country is probably closer to the typical Arizona ranch than the Kansas ranch. So this ranch is really not quite like an Arizona ranch, but I have friends in the Peloncillo Mountains of eastern Arizona who raise Angus cows on the rock pile. and they're just as good as any other cow for the ability to get around. The big difference between a crossbred, a Brahma-influenced crossbred cow and an Angus cow out here is how far they'll go to water. But on our ranch, we've got water within a mile of every direction, and so it really wasn't a question. I didn't have to ask her to walk 2 miles. Sure. I don't see a breed disadvantage. For me, the biggest thing, I've got a business background and like to study stuff. I got interested in the Angus cattle because the data are there. There are data. There aren't data in a lot of other breed types that you could get to. And so I could read on it, try it out, see how it worked. And last year, our spring slaughtered cattle were 100% choice or better, which is just what the textbook says.
One of the things I've observed here this morning, you've done an excellent job of matching your cow herd to your season. Could you speak a little bit? I mean, how did you arrive on those seasons, and how did you decide to do that?
Well, Arizona has one growing season to speak of. It's usually in the summer, and I've been out here since the 50s, and I remember it raining on San Juan's Day, the 21st or so of June, but every year it seems to rain a little later. And what I've tried to do, also in the Ranching 101 textbook, they said, well, a single breeding season is the best, and if you can't do that, having 2 is second best, but it gives you a second chance with that cow. So I decided to have 2 breeding seasons and to stagger them at the front end and the back end of the growing season. So I've got a set of cows that calve in May and June, and I got another set of cows that calve in August and September, and we have been able to keep the fertility up on both sides, although the fall-born calves are lighter when we wean them in January and February than the spring-born calves that wean around Thanksgiving time. So.
You know, often we talk about in the cattle business a 3-legged stool, and you mentioned our mutual friend, Dr. Randall Spare of the Ashland Veterinary Clinic. You know, he and I went to school together, and we kind of come up with the term saying, okay, if we have a herd health program, and if we give them something to eat, and gosh, if we can turn out some predictive superior genetics, we'll do 2 things. First and foremost, we'll be an outlier amongst most beef cattle contemporary groups, and the other thing, we'll have a greater chance at adding value. And you mentioned that you haven't been doing this a long time, but I would commend you that you've been a profit seeker that has sought out the truth and the information. And if we match those 3 things with our environments, and I think that's what Angus cattle and what our database, it's very descriptive, it's very dynamic. When we look at what Sally Northcutt and Bill Bowman have done and what they're going to continue to do, it'll become more dynamic. We talked yesterday a little bit about, we need to sustain the humans too. And so if we can do that, and I think that's what's so cool, and obviously a great joy for me to observe is watching how you've done that and matched that to this beautiful ranch.
Well, Randall was complimentary to me. Usually I really can't talk to him a lot during calving season or breeding season, but all winter he'll spend hours on the phone with me. And he said that he was really enjoying watching me lift the stones and look what was underneath them and then trying them. And every time we've done it, it's worked. We've had no issues. Well, I'm really surprised that you guys have come 900 miles from Kansas to see one of your smaller customers out in Arizona. But I can tell you that I appreciate every bit of it. I've used you more as an adjunct professor of ag science than the ag science guys at our local university. They have in this community different kinds of problems with people who are on public lands and can't manage for the livestock. They have to manage for the rules and regulations in public lands. Here we can do what works with the cows, and we enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And whether a person buys 1 bull or a bunch more, you're all important to our operation. And the second you buy that bull, I mean, We often talk about Henry's rules, but Henry's rule is to do all we possibly can to help you succeed.
Well, you want to know one thing about Henry's rules that's got to be by God truth? Okay, so we're delivering cattle that get harvested at U.S. premium, and we get graded on the grid, and we get paid for what we deliver. I would know a show bull from a puppy dog. And I've only been able to do this by looking at EPDs, and all 300 or 400 bulls that I see when you're sales, and I walk through the pens with those other guys, and I got my checklist. But all I'm doing is marking down whether I saw the bull that I thought had good EPDs or not.
Sure.
Because beauty doesn't, I can't tell a beautiful one from an ugly one. So that part of Henry's rules makes me feel good. It reinforces what I can do.
He had another statement called "Pretty is as pretty does." You give them the job description, and they can look however they want. And I think that's what you've learned, maybe as well as any customer we've dealt with. Here's your environment. Here's your opportunity to perform. Go do it and make a living.
I know a couple of seasons ago, I bought a bull with an M Freeze brand. I know he came from Joe Mayer's place, and that bull didn't have any ear tips. He was thousands of dollars cheaper than the bull before or after him, but he's working here every day and has a good time.
Well, phenotype did go to your advantage there. So.